Hi everyone, how you going? So, Twitter's alive with Centrelink's replies to people about what happens to people on Cashless, Debit card and Basics card in a natural disaster. So far we've only got the same generic responses of ring us, call us. And then they've said they're going to send in emergency mobile teams into the affected areas that'll be able to help people. However, Centrelink doesn't actually help people with the cashless debit card. And if you go outside of a cashless debit card trial region and you go to another Centrelink somewhere else, the staff have no idea about it whatsoever. They haven't seen one, they don't know how it works, they don't know what to do with it, and you'll get fobbed off to the hotline. That's if there is a phone line working. And then they're saying, I'll use a public phone box. With the way it is to get onto Centrelink these days, I'm sure people will appreciate you standing in a phone box for 3 bloody hours trying to get through anyway. But the point of this that I'm trying to point out is in September 2016, we witnessed with the cashless debit card trial in Ceduna, where the power went down across South Australia, right? And people argued, oh, the power's out, no one could use their card. Well, what they did was, standard emergency practice, was they brought in a generator into town and they put it in the local pub, and they were advertising on the radio that locals could come into town, into the pub, they could use the FPOS facilities there and they could get cash out so they could go to the stores in town and they could shop with cash transactions. Because the power was out, shops were using generators to run, but that cash only, right? But they got the FPOS machine working so that people could draw out cash. Unless you were on a cashless debit card and you couldn't draw out any cash. Those people were stranded for 8 days. No power, no food, no transport, no cash, no ability to be able to be part of that community, right? And at the time, the trolls all called us liars, and the government carried on and said, no, they weren't left stranded. Well, they were left stranded, right? The Basics card. How many times over the last 12 years has the Basics card failed in Northern Territory and all over for our First Nations people where they don't have access? Or they're getting ripped off because they have to use Book Up and pay 15% to the government stores so they can use Book Up to get goods because there's no internet or power, right? And now we've got national disasters on both sides of the country. We've got bushfires all down one side, we've got bushfires on the other side, plus a cyclone coming in on the top of Western Australia, plus another one possibly brewing across Darwin, right? And the road closures in Western Australia have now cut Western Australia off completely from South Australia, right? We have 11,600 people on cashless debit cards around the country, and we have 29,000 people on Basics cards. All of them at the mercy of if the power goes down, right, and they can't get cash out. So, what's the government going to do about this? Because our logical thing is you can't go forward with expanding the cashless debit card across the Northern Territory, the Cape York, right, when the infrastructure's not there, when the infrastructure goes down, when either card you cannot access cash out, right, when a normal general population, right, when generators are brought in, can access cash out. Now, what played on my mind watching all this week was the mass evacuations out of towns, right? And my thought was, you know, you're trying to get fuel at the service station. Your card won't work if the comms are down, but everybody else has been able to access cash prior, because, I mean, a lot of these places had a few days' notice that things were going to go wrong, start stocking up, start getting your cash in order, start getting your goods in order, act, you know, watch and act, right? But people on cashless debit cards and Basics cards couldn't do that. They couldn't go to an ATM and draw out their cash to make sure they're safe and the power is gone. So you can imagine somebody who's low on fuel and they're trying to get out and they can't get out, right? Or they know they can't top up at the fuel station with everybody else is, we're using cash. So they think, well, we'll try and we'll see what we've got. What happens if they break down on the highway and they hold everybody up, right? And then somebody comes up and says, what's wrong? And they go, we're running out of fuel, right? I couldn't use my card and I couldn't get any cash out. You know, in that situation, you've got, they had 78,000 people trying to evacuate on the East Coast. Do you know what I mean? You've got people that are stressed, that are fleeing for their lives, basically, you're going to get someone who's eventually going to come up with a jerry can and put some petrol in that person's car. Not before that person's been abused uphill and down because they're holding up the works because they couldn't get access to cash out and they had to run the gauntlet, right? Or they just got left behind, whatever, and then they have to rely on hanging around a campground, an evacuation centre, and rely on the government to get them out or whatever. Do you know what I mean? These cards put people at risk. Already caused too many suicides across the country. Already causing too many mental health problems and the loss of dignity, right? And the stigma that's attached to it. But to actually purposely put people at risk in natural disasters. Now, we're not going to get a reprieve from this. Our fire season is only at the beginning, technically, even though these fires started as far back as May, June, July, August, September, October, November, right? And they're not going to stop. There's a little bit of a reprieve at the moment with the weather, but it's, in a couple of days' time, off they'll go again. Meanwhile, you've got two cyclones. One's a Category 1, possibly Category 2, crossing the coast in WA. You've got another one, the monsoon's dragging down behind it. Right, so the top end's going to get flooding, road closures, power outages, people stranded again, right? You go down the coast, you've got Esperance, Norseman, right, the highways cut everywhere, and it's causing problems. And without cash, people can't live. This needs to be really, really, really hammered now. We are not in for a nice summer and a nice, easy, spring, autumn, whatever, coming in. You know what I mean? We've just got the start of our cyclone season. And don't forget, North Queensland gets cyclones too. We're coming to our cyclone season now from now to April, right? And if the monsoon brings them, Cape York, where they want to put the cashless debit card, they've already got the basics card, right? And the top end and Darwin. You can't possibly roll this card out anymore. In fact, it needs to be stopped because this is just getting crazy now. It shows that, 11,600 people on cashless debit card at the moment, 29,000 people on basics card. And if they get their way, right, at least 23,000 of those people will roll over onto cashless debit card and more, in April the 8th, I believe it is, even though the legislation hasn't even gone to Senate yet, hasn't been debated yet, the vote hasn't gone through, but that's the start date for the full rollout for the Northern Territory and Cape York. This cannot go ahead, right? We just cannot allow this to go ahead. You're putting people's lives at risk. Now, we've had 12 years of basics card that has been putting people's lives at risk. Low birth weights in children, low nutrition, right? It was even considered that depending on when a person was put on the basics card during pregnancy, depending on what level of intellectual disability children were suffering because of the stress, the hormonal and chemical stress caused damage to the fetus because the parent was put on basics card. And they've got this information, right? We've seen the stress with the cashless debit card. In Hinkler, every person I speak to has ended up on bloody medication because they can't cope with the loss of autonomy. They can't cope with the constant fuck-ups on their rents, the destruction of their credit histories, the destruction of their rental histories, right? Getting breach notices, some people getting evicted, right? They can't pay their bills properly. They don't have the freedom to make decisions, right? Because Indue has taken over that side of their lives. We've had suicides in other states that we know of, and I've had one lady came very close here up in Hinkler that I know of, right? We don't know if there's others, you know what I mean? Keith Pitt came out and said, 700 people got off the card. No, they didn't. 8 people have gotten off the card in Hinkler, thank you very much, according to the government's own data. And that's from well-being exemptions and being out of area before the vote was taken I know of at least 2 people where they tried to put them on the card, even though they'd moved out in 2018 before the vote had even gone through. And they got off because they weren't in the region when it assented on the 21st of December 2018. All right? And I know of 3 wellbeing exemptions myself. That's out of 6,700 people. This card cannot function. People cannot function in a natural disaster if they're hobbled to Indue. Simple as that, right? They can't even contact Indue. And over Christmas, I had parents that were up here that weren't affected by disasters ringing Indue, trying to get some help with some issues with rent, being told, oh, you have to wait to the 2nd of January because the DSS hasn't come back and we don't have the ability to do that. Meanwhile, people fall further and further behind on rent and get more and more nasty letters from their landlords, and they're getting more and more in debt and more stress. All right, this card has to go. This weather oh God, cyclones, flooding, road closures, and fires. Right, and the only thing that works is cash. The ability to have cash in your pocket, so that when you go to that service station and they're running on a generator to operate their pumps, and they're manually operating the till, right? You can walk in and fill up your bloody tank, right? If you've got a car, you can get there, or at least you can give somebody some money for a bloody lift, right? Trying to show somebody your Indue card in this situation, or end up being told, well, I can't go anywhere, so I'll have to go to the campground and just sit and wait and hope that services can get in to evacuate me out. Right? Wrong. Leaving families in that situation is disgusting. Right? This disaster shows how unprepared this government was for anything. Because they just weren't prepared. But they didn't want to get prepared. They had plenty of warning. They had been warned since 2008 this was coming. Every year the CSIRO put out reports of what was coming, right? And then you had the fireys asking for stuff 18 months ago. Please put these preparations in play. No. Right? Johnny come lately, this government has a habit of cutting everything that's preventative, right? Because, don't waste the money on preventative stuff. We'll cut all the services. We'll cut this. We'll cut that. We'll take the money out of this. We'll take the money out of that. We'll use it for something else. And now it's going to kick them in the arse, right? The $2 billion that they're offering isn't going to be scratching the surface. The economy of South Australia, Tasmania, Kangaroo Island, and the whole of Victoria and New South Wales, Western Australia, their economies are going to be in the shit, right? This is my opinion. They need to raise the rate immediately across the whole country for people that are on Social Security. Get rid of the damn cashless debit card basics cards. They're a hindrance that are going to cost people lives, right? And then stop hobbling wages back. You know what I mean? Put penalty rates back, because you need to stimulate the economy with what's left that hasn't been destroyed by a natural disaster, with those people that are still working and those that are on Social Security that can spend their money in the economy, right? They need the cash to do it, right? We've got too many businesses going under. Our economy's going under, and this is going to knock the shit out of our economy all over. Yep, stuff your surplus, foreign bird, because you haven't got time to worry about it, right? You were clinging onto it at the expense of the poor. Well, you're going to have to let go of it, right? Because you're about to have a whole new breed of people entering the centrelink system that are going to, they haven't got a clue what they're entering into. I've already seen a report where a guy's like, how am I going to pay my bills? There's not enough money to pay my bills, right? A lot of people are going to wake up after this as to how low New Start payments are. Even if they're classified as a disaster emergency payment, they're still only the equivalent of a New Start payment, right? The bills don't start, they don't stop coming. The interest doesn't stop accumulating just because you are having to use that payment, right? It's devastating that people have lost homes, businesses and jobs through this, right? And unfortunately, a lot of them are about to find out that it can happen to anybody. That a lot of people out there are not shirkers, And it's not that they don't want to work. They're on payments because of circumstances. They've lost jobs. They've got injured at work. They've got sick. They've had domestic violence issues, had to flee. They're homeless, right? Similar issues. And these people now that have lost everything in the fires and their jobs and everything are about to find out what this system's about and how poverty-stricken they will be. My questions are quite simple. When is Anne Ruston going to step up and talk about what are they going to do with people on Basics card, Cashless debit card? In Canberra, all the Basics card users are Indigenous people. Have they been given masks for the smoke haze that's in Canberra? Are they getting help? Right? Because, nothing worse than being absolutely homeless like that and they can't get out of the smoke. Right? You've got... The next question would be, these new people that will be going onto the system, will they have to wait the 12 weeks? Will they be, will it be income tested, assets, right? What happens if people have got savings in the bank? Will they be turned away and told you've got too much in the bank, you have to use that first? Right? Like everybody else is. These are things that need to be looked at, do you know what I mean? Because you're going to have an awful lot of people entering the system and they're going to get a big bloody shock, and it won't be waiting for their insurance company to rebuild their house that's going to knock them down. It's the fact they won't be able to pay their bills and they go bankrupt. That'll do them in. Do you know what I mean? They won't have enough money to buy food and they won't be able to get housing because there's a housing crisis already without all of the loss that we've got now. I think there's a lot of things that need to be looked at, and the government needs to start really looking at everybody as a whole. They've spent the last 7 years kicking the shit out of people on social security, parents, disabled people, carers, elderly people, right? Our youth, our students, right? They're bludgers, they're this, they're routers, everything like that. Well, now you've got a whole different situation, right? It's about time we all became inclusive. I do feel sorry for all of the people that have lost everything in these fires. And what about the ones that are on Centrelink that were renting a house and they don't own the house and they've got no insurance, they've got no contents insurance because they can't afford that on a Centrelink payment. They've lost everything, and where do they go now? Where do they go now? They've got nowhere to go, nothing. And I can tell you now, nowhere to go and nothing and only a Centrelink payment to live on. There's a crisis, and it's here, and it's now, all right? And they need to sort it. Johnny come lately, Morrison can't come in and bring in the ADF and go, doing it now, too late, too late, right? Because these are the things that should have been in preparation 6 months ago when these fires started. They knew the monsoon will bring cyclones. They already get weather forecasting for that. Oh, but one of their ministers claims that the Bureau of Meteorology makes it all up and it's bullshit, right? They're climate denial and they carry on about it all the time. Well, their climate denial is costing lives. 20 dead so far. And our wildlife, I can't even imagine the scale of the devastation for our wildlife. And I couldn't imagine what it'd be like to be fighting those fires and hearing it all around you, and then having to be the wildlife people, rescuers that have got to go in and try and find what has survived. Right? And these fires haven't stopped yet. There's just a little bit of a reprieve in the weather for a couple of days and then it's off again. Right? But this isn't over, and this might not be over for 2 months. But by then we've got cyclones coming the top end. So the cashless debit card needs to be scrapped. Right? And people on social security need to be treated with dignity and respect, and the new ones that are coming in are going to get a hell of a shock, and there's nothing we can do to prepare them for it, right? Because they're going to get a reality of what it's really like, and the bureaucracy and the red tape and the mutual obligations and the bullshit that's going to go with it, and it's going to knock a few people around because they're not going to be ready for this, right? Because they've had their jobs and they've had their lives, and a lot of them have never probably had to utilise the system. And then they're going to suddenly realise, oh my God, 5 million people or more have to do this every week. Join the queue, join the crowd, join the club. Alright? Who knows? But Scott Morrison can't come in and claim all the credit for all the work that's been done, because I'll tell you now, the fire chiefs and the RFS and the volunteers on the ground, and a lot of New Start volunteers that have had their payments suspended, which is now being changed, by the way. How kind. People won't have to worry about their mutual obligations or their robo-debts for 8 weeks. Whoopie chook. 8 weeks. What if they lost their house? You know what I mean? Not going to be fixed in 8 weeks. This disaster is not going to be cured and fixed in 8 weeks. But that's all the departments allowed people at the moment. Who knows? Anyway, I better get off and we'll keep going. And if you're out there and you're on a card and you're stuck in a fire zone and you've got problems, let us know. Alright? My God, Twitter's letting Centrelink know all about it, that's for sure. Okay guys, I'll talk to you later. See ya.